Everybody, welcome back for our day 2 of ng-conf 2021. Thanks for joining us for our keynote. To everyone who was with us yesterday, thanks for being a part of the show. We had a lot of fun. We had walks with Minko, we had lightning talks, we had yoga classes, and we had a couple experts rooms in addition to all the great talks. Today, we have an awesome keynote this morning, but as you listen to the talks today, we want to invite each of you to engage with the speakers on social media. As a speaker, when you go to a conference, one of the funnest parts is getting the positive feedback and the thanks for giving your talk. And in a remote conference, that's really hard, those connections to make. So we want to invite everyone, please reach out to the speakers on social media, tell them how much you enjoyed their talks, follow them, and engage with them during the Q&As so that it's a better conference and a better experience for everyone involved. Let's move on to our keynote. We've got 2 keynotes this morning, back to back, by 3 different speakers. First up, we have Ben Lesh from the RxJS core team. He's speaking about what's new, as well as their roadmap for the future. Next, we have Brandon Roberts and Mike Ryan from the NGRX core team. They're here speaking about what's new in NGRX, as well as the roadmap. So everybody, please welcome to the stage our first 2 keynotes.
Okay, everybody, this is the RxJS updates for ng-conf 2021. My name is Ben Lesh. I am the project lead for RxJS. I currently work at Citadel Securities, and some of you might know that I was formerly on the Angular core team. So this is all going to be about what's new in RxJS 7. RxJS 7 has been under development and actually in beta now for nearly a year, almost exactly a year at this point. Just a quick overview of what you can expect in RxJS 7. It's smaller. I mean, much smaller. We've got fixes to TypeScript typings. It's more consistent APIs. We're moving towards consolidating all of the multicasting because it's an area of confusion for a lot of people. And we've got a whole host of new features. So first off, I want to talk about how RxJS is smaller. This is a refactor. This is not like a big bang rewrite of anything. Like we didn't rewrite the entire thing to make it smaller. It wasn't like a side-by-side deal. It's now actually, if you include everything, and I mean, if you like do the entire kitchen sink of RxJS stuff, it is 53% of the original size. That's 53% of whatever size you would have seen in RxJS 6. That's including new features, actually. So if you include everything, and I mean everything that it exports, and which no one would ever do, that'd be a little crazy, but you're looking at a size difference of, you know, in the 90s, like 93, I think, kilobytes down to like 50, 51 kilobytes. So that's really, really massive savings. This is just a screenshot of actually it's an Angular app that I use to bundle everything to get an idea of how much space it takes if you include everything at all in RxJS in an Angular app. And you're looking at like 93, almost pretty much 94 kilobytes for RxJS if you're using RxJS 6.6, which is the current latest version. So in RxJS 7 beta 15, which is the current next version at the time I wrote this, you're looking at 53 kilobytes, which is, as you can see, substantially smaller. And one thing that I really want to note is that operators come at a much smaller cost. So if you include every operator in RxJS 6, just the operators, just the things you can pass into pipe, you're looking at 52 kilobytes, all right? So that's actually the entire size of everything that you could possibly put in RxJS 7. Like the whole kitchen sink now is actually, with new features, is actually the same size as just the operators were in RxJS 6. So RxJS 7, if you include every single operator, you're looking at 19 kilobytes. So much, much smaller. And I just took a sampling here of some very, very common things that I tend to put in projects I'm working on. And in RxJS 6, you're looking at like 10.4 kilobytes. In RxJS 7, you're looking at 4.1 kilobytes. So really substantial savings there. So the question comes like, how did it get smaller? I'm not going to go into great detail on this because I really want to talk about what you can expect to come up in the next few weeks here with RxJS. But it was not a big bang rewrite. This was not. This is not T-Rex or any of the experimental versions that I worked on over the years, from which I learned a lot. This was actually slow, methodical refactoring of what currently existed. So there wasn't like a huge architectural change. There was a bunch of minor changes here and there, just kind of shuffling code around. So it did the same thing, just bare movement. And then at one moment you see like, oh, well, now we can go through and fix all of these operators to be smaller. And then you just kind of run for daylight there. But like all of it, again, was just slowly but surely making the code smarter in places and smaller in places. Another thing you can expect in RxJS 7 that's coming up is we've got much better TypeScript typings. So it's targeting TypeScript 4.2, which is the latest version of TypeScript, which gives us so many features that we can use to type some of these very, very hard to type things in RxJS. And it's just hard to type functional libraries like this with TypeScript. One of the ones that when you update, this is probably going to bite a few people in Angular. They're not going to quite understand what's going on, as we finally fixed subject next. So RxJS was originally written against TypeScript 1.8, if you can imagine. And back then, the only way to make it convenient for someone to call next without an argument was to make the value optional, which is technically incorrect. You can see here, I've got a subjective number, and with my subjective number, it's allowing me in RxJS 6 to call next without passing a number to it, which is wrong. I mean, that's type safety should prevent us from doing that. Now in RxJS 7, it does prevent us from doing that. If you do want a subject where you can call next without passing a value, what you need to do is you have to say it is a subject of void or a subject of number or void or whatever it is, but you have to include void in there to make sure that it knows that you can pass nothing to next. Another one that I'm going to highlight here is toPromise was typed incorrectly before. The problem with toPromise, as you can see in this example, is if I have a source, an observable that sometimes emits a value and sometimes doesn't emit a value, which means it just closes, it's like an empty. toPromise will actually, in the cases where it doesn't emit a value, will actually emit undefined, or it will resolve with undefined. So that's not right. It's the type, well, rather, that was the correct behavior that we agreed upon for toPromise years and years ago. But the type for it was incorrect because it was returning a promise of T, but it's really, truthfully, a promise of T or undefined because we have no way of knowing whether or not the observable will emit one value or not. So that's been fixed now in version 7. So what you're going to notice now is you actually get the correct type back, where sometimes it could be undefined. Now, a lot of times you're sort of relying on the fact that you know it could never be undefined. That's fine. You could put an exclamation point on it if you want in TypeScript, but we actually have something better. We've added 2 new features that are called last value from and first value from, and we're going to deprecate toPromise. So in the next version, which is a long ways down the road, in version 8, we're going to be removing toPromise, and we're going to be having this much more tree shakeable form, which is last value from or first value from, which is a little different than what toPromise does, which is more dealing with the last value. Those look like this. Last value from and first value from will actually reject with an error that says no elements in sequence if for some reason the observable completes without any elements emitted. So in this case, you could handle that with a try catch. So it actually gives you an exceptional case. So you can actually tell the difference between an observable of undefined or an observable that's actually empty when you're using this. The other thing that's nice is it's not a method on observable, which means it's a bit more tree shakeable than toPromise, which is one of the reasons we want to get rid of toPromise. There's also a nice feature that it was recently added to this that allows you to define a default value. So if for some reason you don't get like any sort of value at all from the source, you can default it to whatever you like. So it's configurable. You don't just always get undefined. Another big improvement is functions with n-args. So that means like functions that take any number of arguments, and we have to kind of figure out what's in those arguments and return the proper type to you, now behave much, much better. So in RxJS 6, if you were to take of, this is just one of dozens of examples in our library, and you pass more than 8 or 9 arguments to it, it really freaks out. It can't figure out what you're trying to do. And that's because like that particular version, the versions of TypeScript that we were originally targeting with RxJS 6 really couldn't handle dealing with n arguments. So it's just going to freak out. You're going to get like source of maybe observable of empty object or observable of unknown or something like that. But in RxJS 7, it handles it all really neatly. You can do any number of arguments and it will figure it out. And that's true for many of our operators now. Like if you're dealing with functions like of or things like concat or maybe concat with, that sort of thing. So most of the problems you're going to find after this change when you're upgrading to RxJS 7 are going to come because you had to explicitly type something or explicitly pass generics to one of our functions in order to get the right outcome. And we've changed a lot of the generic signatures in order to get better type inference out of just plain ordinary calls to the method. So what you do to fix that is literally just remove the just remove the explicit generics, and you'll probably be okay, and your code will be a lot cleaner. Another thing that's coming in RxJS 7 are long running. We've been waiting to do some of these things, updates to API consistency. So there were a lot of places where our API was strange or behaved weird or behaved inconsistently with other APIs we had, but we couldn't really change them without a major version update because somebody might be relying on those inconsistent behaviors. So one of the things that existed in RxJS 6 that we maybe couldn't fix, even though it was arguably definitely a bug, because people might be relying on it, is when finalization occurred relative to things like concat or on error resume next, or some of these things that have a continuation of another observable. And this is in RxJS 6. You can see I've got an observable that's a synchronous observable. It gives me a value. It logs it out synchronously. Then it waits 100 milliseconds. And then it's going to log it out again because it's going to go down to the subscribe. And then right after that, it's going to finalize, which means like, oh, I'm saying that everything's all done and it's going to log that out. And you can see the output from RxJS 6 makes no sense. It's nonsense. It's saying, all right, synchronously, say you're in tap 1, then emit 1, then wait, synchronously you're in tap 2, then finalize 1. So like those seem out of order, and that's not okay. We fixed those in RxJS 7. So you're going to get consistent output with RxJS 7 in any of these situations where you would expect something to finalize before moving on to the next observable in a chain, say concat again, or on error resume next, or anything that's going to subscribe to another observable, maybe catch error or something. So speaking of finalize, this is one that I always thought was really funny, but again, we couldn't change it because people might be depending on the behavior. If you have multiple finalizes in a row, in RxJS 6 and lower, it kind of reverses the order of when those are executed. It starts at the bottom and executes on the way back up. That's really unintuitive and didn't make a lot of sense. So we were able to change that in this new major version. So now finalize will execute in the proper order. Very similar fix to the other one, by the way. Another thing that was really inconsistent throughout our library was some of our operators would treat a complete call, not a next call, but a complete call, as though they were signals to notify that something happened. And these operators were things like audit, buffer toggle, buffer when, debounce, what you see here in the left column. And that was inconsistent with what you see in the right column. Now they all behave the same way. So a completion will never be a notification now. A completion is the end bracket of an array. It has no meaning other than the producer is telling you it is not sending any more events or values. So it's really, really important to remember that going forward. And it'll be easier to remember it because the library is consistent throughout. It's going to make sure that you're doing the right thing. Another one, and this one's irked me for a very long time. We've had subscription.add has since version 5 returned a subscription, and there are reasons for this. But the problem is people would chain it, like you see here on the left. They would chain it and they'd subscription add and then add another one, and then add another one. And it's not doing what you think it's doing. What it's actually doing is add is returning the reference to that child subscription every single time. And the reason it was doing that is it was doing that so you could pass a function to add, and it would return a subscription that you could then pass to remove in order to remove that function from the internal state of your subscription. It's not really a widely used feature, but that add chaining option that people had added a lot of confusion, and we've gotten rid of that in RxJS 7. In RxJS 7, add just returns void. So you can't accidentally make this weird mistake anymore. And the other thing that was nice that we added in here is you can add and remove a function directly from a subscription now. So you can do the same with same thing you do with functions as you would with subscriptions, and it handles it much more neatly under the hood. So I want to just stress that this is just a few of the highlights. I'm going to try to go into this in more detail and an upcoming, like, much longer talk at RxJS Live, but like these are things that are going to be important to you as Angular users. And overall, there were dozens and dozens of these like minor inconsistency issues that we fixed, things with like how delay behaved and so on and so forth. Another big one that's coming up, or that's coming here in RxJS 7, is we are consolidating what we're doing with multicasting. And this is probably one of the most confusing areas of RxJS. A lot of the bugs we get reported in the repository are actually people using share replay and getting confused by it. And I mean, an excessive amount of bugs are reported because of that. We have lots of multicasting operators in RxJS 6 right now, and they all do very, very similar things. We've got multicast, publish, all the published variants, share and share replay. Ref count kind of counts in there, even though you can only put it after a publish and so on. And that's kind of weird nonsense in and of itself. Like you can't put ref count after map, right? Like why is it an operator? So we've got all of this broad list, and people don't quite know what to reach for. Share replay causes a ton of confusion. This is what I was talking about, where you can, here I've got an interval that fires every second. I'm saying, hey, I put a tap in there so I could see when that interval's firing. And I'm saying, hey, use a share replay on it. And then some other code says, all right, take that ticker that's shared with share replay, and I only want to take 3 of them. And then I want to unsubscribe, right? So, because just take 3. And so you subscribe to that, and you can see in my, right over here in my console log that I've got a screenshot of it does 0, 1, 2 as you would expect, but then it just keeps ticking. Like, why is my ticker still going? And I've leaked a subscription. We get a lot of error reports. You're leaking subscriptions, and almost every single time it's someone using share replay and not understanding that share replay is going to hold on to one subscription until completion, because it's assuming that whatever you have is some big expensive thing, and it wants to make sure that it completes and caches that. So now you can actually get this. Did I skip too far? I must have replaced the slide. So what you actually wanted to do with share replay is there's a ref count option you can pass. It's a ref count equals true, and it will do what you expect it's going to do. But even better, now in RxJS 7, we have a share operator. It's the same share operator you always use, but now it's got configuration, and you can configure it by saying, here's a factory for the subject I want to connect through. Here is configuration for when I want that subject to reset, which means like basically recycle the subject and get a new one. So you can say, in this case, I want to use a replay subject and I want to reset it if the ref count hits 0, or I want to reset it if it's the source completes or if the source errors. And we get the outcome that you're expecting. And this is going to be the same outcome as passing ref count true to replay subject. So going forward, we strongly recommend that you use this new share for all cases where you want to share something, because you can more explicitly define the behavior and there's fewer surprises about what in the world's going to happen in there. The other thing about multicasting that is a bit odd is this whole thing with publish or multicast returning a connectable observable. It doesn't come out well in TypeScript. So you end up having to cast it or whatever, because you're like, oh, okay, I published this, and then you want to connect it later. It ends up being this really, really bizarre thing. And so what we did is we provided a new connectable function that's not an operator, it's just a function. And you pass any observable you like to it, and it makes that observable connectable. So it becomes a connectable observable. And this is a code example right here. So connectable, it also allows you to pass in what subject you'd like to connect through. So it can do anything that multicast can do. It can do anything that any of the publish variants can do. And it operates effectively as a replacement for the publish variants. So given this and share, you really don't need publish anymore. Ref count would be right out. I would always use share in that case. So the whole publish replay ref count pattern, pretty much replace it with share. If you're doing anything where you want to call connect, you want to use the connectable function. So just so you know, we are keeping these for the entirety of version 7. We're keeping multicast, publish replay, everything that you're already used to. But we're adding connectable, and we've improved share. We've added new features to share. We are, however, deprecating everything that you see slashed out here. So multicast, the publish variants, and ref count, all deprecated because we want to get rid of them in version 8. We're not deprecating share replay. And the reason we're not deprecating share replay, even though it's the most confusing thing that causes us so much headache, is because it is so popular right now. And eventually we probably want to deprecate it. But for now, what I'm just going to tell you is you should try to use share and connectable all the time. Try to move away from share replay if you can. And we'll watch and see if the popularity of that dies down, because share replay is indeed just a specialization of share now. We've got new features. So I just want to do a really quick roundup of new features because I don't have a ton of time for this talk, and I'll try to get into more detail about these at a later time or online. But this is just, again, this isn't even all the new features, but this is some of it. We have async iterable support. That means if you create an async generator, async iterable with async function star, you can pass that in anywhere that will accept an observable input. So if it accepts an observable or a promise or an iterable, it'll now also accept async iterable. Likewise with readable stream. So readable stream doesn't come from a lot of places, but it was an easy add after we handled async iterable. So readable stream would come from things like the body of a fetch, for example. And I believe you can also get some from streaming media sources in the DOM. We've also added a new creation function called animation frame. So animation frames does pretty much what it sounds like. It makes an observable that fires every animation frame and actually gives you the high resolution timestamp that would normally occur on the animation frame, as well as the amount of elapsed time that's happened since the observable started. So it's very useful for animations. And it's actually an idea that I came up with at an ng-conf here, I think probably about 2 years ago. So it's cool to see that finally get shipped. We also have a lot of improvements to Ajax. So there's upload and download streaming now. And Ajax is something that not a lot of people use in Angular land, but just so you're aware, if you already have RxJS in your app, whether you're in React or whatever, the Ajax library actually is only like 4 kilobytes if you use RxJS Ajax. So it's very lightweight and it's very feature rich now in RxJS version 7. We also have a new switch scan operator. This is just to kind of round out some of the other behaviors. It was, again, an easy add. It was a feature that had been asked for several times. I'm not going to get into what it does. You can go look that up in our documentation. But it is a fun new operator. I suggest going and playing with it, trying it out. We've got combine latest object. So similar to how we added fork join with an object, so it would emit objects of the same shape with the values in it. Combine latest, same sort of deal. First value from, last value from, I already talked about. There are two new configuration options, one for on stopped notification and one for on unhandled error. And these are both very similar. So on stopped notification, this is something you can configure to probably just log or something like that, but you can configure this to handle instances where you have a subject or something that is stopped, meaning it can't do anything anymore because it's already been it's already had error next or complete or called on it, and someone tries to next into it or tries to call error on it again or something like that, this handler will fire. So you can kind of catch these weird exceptional cases, maybe help you identify problems in your code. Same thing with on unhandled error. With the exception of on unhandled error, what this is if you call subscribe with no error handler, so you didn't provide an observer with an error handler, and an error makes it all the way down to that subscribe, and this is the end subscribe where you're consuming your observable, this on unhandled error will be called. And if you use this, it's going to always call this in a different call stack, just so you know. So that way you can't accidentally throw an error in here, have it unwind the stack up into RxJS internals and cause all sorts of weird havoc. We've also added a factory function option to throw error. So you can create the error on demand when you want to throw it, as opposed to creating an error and just leaving it sit around. There's a weird thing, I tweeted about this a while ago, but there's a weird thing with errors in V8 where an error, if you create a new error, until you access the stack property of the error, it will retain everything that's in scope in memory. So you don't want to create a new error and just leave it sitting around. So we have this new factory function version of throw error. I highly recommend using it if you're using throw error. There's, of course, the configurable version of share and connectable, which I've already talked about as well. All right, so last but not least, coming up soon, actually from some of the same people who make this awesome conference that I'm speaking at right now, there is RxJS Live. So RxJS Live, so you know, is there's been 2 so far, and it is a collection of probably the best talks I've ever seen on RxJS. So I will be talking more about the release of RxJS 7 at RxJS Live and trying to go into more detail about all of the features and things that have been added. That's it. Thank you very much. I just want to remind you, so by the time that you're going to view this, the RxJS 7 release candidate will be out. In reality, we're on beta 15. Really, this is probably should have been called like a release candidate 3 or 4 by now. But please install this as soon as possible and try to use it, provide feedback. The entire community is relying on you to do these things. So far, we've got a lot of amazing feedback from Google, so I have a high degree of confidence that this is going to work out well for a lot of people. You can find us on GitHub at reactivex/RxJS, and you can find me on Twitter at Ben Lesh. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you for joining us for a brief update on NGRX. NGRX is a collection of reactive libraries for Angular applications. It's a community-run organization founded by ex-Angular core team member Rob Wormald, with the goal of providing state management solutions and other reactive libraries to Angular. Today, we're excited to cover new features and new releases, but first, some quick introductions. Brandon?
My name is Brandon Roberts, and I work at Narwhal, where we help companies build applications at scale using NX, an open source build framework.
And my name is Mike Ryan, a software architect at Synapse Wireless, helping to make manufacturing more sustainable.
Let's talk about NGRX in 2020 by the numbers. We've had over 120 contributors, over 350,000 developers using NGRX, with a total of over 15 million downloads. But we would never be where we are without a good mix of core contributors and community. From founders and alumni to current community contributors, NGRX continues to thrive because of the people around it. Even though we didn't have our meeting of the minds at ng-conf this year, the core of our group remains strong. But the real strength lies in those who contribute to the NGRX libraries and continue to help others with their time, effort, and knowledge. So if you want to get involved, visit our GitHub repo and also join our community Discord with 1,000 plus other people who are already there, and let's keep the collaborations going. And on to NGRX state. By the numbers, 1 in 6 apps already use NGRX state. And as we continue to grow in versions 10 and 11, we've continued to fix bugs and add ergonomic improvements, including improved testing outside of the test bed and a way to combine effects and store without the foot guns. You're welcome. And now Mike is going to talk about one of our recent additions to NGRX, Component Store.
Thanks, Brandon. I want to talk about Component Store, the newest library in the collection of NGRX state libraries. Some of you may be familiar with NGRX Store, a library for managing the state of your Angular applications. It's a global state container for your entire Angular app, providing a single source of truth for your components and services to share. It lets you reactively read state out of the container via selectors and update state immutably by dispatching actions. Component Store works similarly, but it's designed for individual components or smaller trees of components. Where NGRX Store is meant for application state, you use Component Store to keep information inside of it that you don't need to share across your application. However, components still pull state out of Component Store reactively by using selectors and update state immutably by calling updaters. It kind of helps me to think of Component Store as being a supercharged service with a subject, if you're familiar with that pattern. It's simple, no-frills state management for components. And since it's designed for components, its lifecycle is attached to components. When your component is created, a new instance of your component store is created. And when your component is destroyed, your instance is automatically cleaned up for you. Let's take a quick look at some sample code to see how to create your own component store. To create a component store, first you define a new Angular service that extends the component store class, and then you initialize the state of your component store in the constructor. From there, you can define special updater functions for your components to call that can receive arguments and immutably update the contained state. You can also provide selector functions to components that let components efficiently read state in the store reactively. To use your new component store, simply drop it into the providers of your component and inject it into the constructor. That's all you have to do to get started with Component Store. I want to highlight that you can use NGRX Component Store without any other NGRX libraries. In fact, you can integrate Component Store into any Angular application, regardless of its state management strategies. To learn more, you can get started today by visiting ngrx.io/guide/component store. There you will find architecture diagrams breaking down Component Store, more information on when to use NGRX Store versus NGRX Component Store, and detailed API information. Now back to Brandon.
Thanks, Mike. Now let's talk about NGRX version 12. So with version 12 right around the corner, we are starting the process of upgrading all the things to Angular 12, and we plan on releasing with Angular 12 so that we can get our good upgrade on all at the same time. Last but not least, we want to thank you again for being with us on the NGRX journey. Thank you to our community contributors and backers, and to our top sponsors, Freebug, Narwhal, House of Angular, Zware, Oasis Digital, Lucas Rubicki, and Deborah Carrata. We hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks.